It's been a real pleasure to be working in Slovenia for me now over 2 years, with a small break in between on this project. And we're here today to discuss the recommended actions we've come up with on improving governance of adult learning in Slovenia. So I'll talk about the journey that got us here. What do we mean by governance in adult learning? We'll give a quick map of Slovenia's adult learning system. When you're from outside a country and you're trying to improve arrangements in a country, the first thing you have to do is try to get your head around who the different players, providers in the system are, etc. So we've tried to do that. And then I'll take you through 8 recommended actions, after which Emma will have a small time for feedback from you. How did we get to this point? So we started in 2016 with the diagnostic phase, and we brought together all these ministries in Slovenia and the government office, and on the OECD side we worked with colleagues from different directorates and took account of a range of OECD research on skills policy issues and how they might play out in Slovenia. We engaged with diverse stakeholders in the diagnostic phase of the project and this phase. Here are some photos from some of the workshops we held last year. And the diagnostic report came up with 9 broad challenges. Following the framework that my colleague Andrew presented earlier in the day, we had some recommendations under the pillar of developing relevant skills in Slovenia, and one of the things we looked at there was improving the skills of low-skilled adults. We looked at activating skills supply, that is getting more people into work and meaningful work. We looked at using skills effectively in workplaces. And then we looked at the systemic issues, and one of those issues was inclusive and effective governance of the skills system. So that all finished up in the middle of last year when we publicly launched that report. So why did we think adult learning was important for Slovenia? We knew from the PIAC results that there were approximately 400,000 adults with low levels of literacy and numeracy skills in Slovenia. The participation in adult learning, the gap in participation is very large for high and low educated adults in Slovenia, and it's one of the largest, if not the largest, in out of European member countries. Also, the rate at which your population is ageing sort of came up again and again in the report, and the implications that would have for the percentage of the population who are actively in work and contributing to the tax base and not drawing on welfare and social assistance, etc. And as Andrew presented earlier, the risk of tasks within jobs and jobs themselves being displaced by technology is quite long. So we thought, for these reasons and many more, adult learning is important. And why is governance and cooperation important for adult learning in Slovenia? Adult learning systems are inherently complex. They exist at the intersection of several other systems and policy areas. Diverse actors with diverse needs and preferences. Interacting policies. The idea of complementary policy and policy coherence and alignment, whether it be with local regional policies, labour, other, and of course the impact that the European Union's directives and soft governance have on activity here in Slovenia. And ultimately that we're talking about a challenge of culture change. I think you've probably heard that a lot in this conference, but at the heart of the concept of lifelong learning and a cooperative approach to lifelong learning is culture change. It's nothing more simple than that. So on to the action phase. We agreed that we would focus on governance of adult learning, strengthening cooperation between ministries, municipalities and stakeholders to increase adult learning and adult skills for work and life. So we thought it necessary to specifically mention municipalities, and by stakeholders we're including social partners, employers, providers, public and private of different sorts, NGOs and many others who have a stake in the adult learning system, and the individual adult learners. So, adult learning, what do we mean? So, we have considered formal and non-formal primarily. Informal, of course, is also important, and we consider adult learning within all the contexts you see on this circle, including workplace, on the job, second chance schooling, higher education, training supported by the Employment Service of Slovenia, etc. So we have a very broad understanding of adult learning. Well, what do we mean by governance? Well, the first thing that we need to do is link it to outcomes. Cooperation in and of itself is a nice idea, and it might make you feel good, but it is not the end. It is a means to an end, and the end that we will be seeking through better, more effective cooperation is increased participation. It's one of our national goals. Increase or improved outcomes at the level of providers and programs, and this would include the personal benefits, the employment benefits that an adult learner experiences, and the wider societal benefits or community benefits. But also cost effectiveness. We'll see later that the adult learning budget has sort of gone up and down quite a bit, the public budget at least in Slovenia, and highly reliant on ESF funds. So cost effectiveness in a context of limited resources is really important, getting the best bang for your buck, as they say. So we've considered governance between ministries, horizontally, vertically, between the central government and municipalities, at the local level, between municipalities and neighbouring municipalities within regions, or between different providers and centres and stakeholders at the local level, but also between government and stakeholders, and in particular representatives of adult learners. And we've considered several factors that can facilitate effective cooperation and coordination in the adult learning system. Do you have clear and shared objectives at the system level? Does everyone buy into those objectives? Is funding sufficient, well targeted and well shared? Do the different actors have accountability, for example, to achieve the high level goals that you set in your master plan? Or are there no consequences for just going away and doing your own thing at the end of the day? Is there a good information base to enrich the dialogue and negotiations and debates different actors, social partners, government, different levels of government are having with each other? Do the different actors feel they have the capacity, the skills to do their job, to meet their targets, etc.? And do they face incentives to coordinate with each other? And we've considered various mechanisms, from legislation to sort of agreements and contracts and coordinating bodies. It's not all about a formal body, but that can be useful if you get them right. Ad hoc and informal processes, etc. And then, because two issues in particular kept coming up as issues that Slovenia feels it needs to better cooperate on, so we've added a couple of actions to the report on the issues of awareness raising and funding adult learning. So there's the timelines. We started with the first mission in March, and now we are at the publication stage of the report, and the launch will be in December. So let's start with the map, an outsider's view on different actors and aspects of your system. So the Ministry of Education obviously has a central role, and perhaps the central role with strategy and planning and formal education. Formal education for adults, officially recognised programs, guidance services, and much more. Various laws establish that. Ministry of Labour. Education and training for the unemployed, national vocational qualification system, which is relevant for adults, of course, recognition of prior learning. And Ministry of Agriculture, education, training, counselling, awareness in agriculture, forestry, food and nutrition. And the list just keeps going. So you've got 9 ministries with legislative responsibilities for different aspects of adult learning. And you can see there that is both a strength of your system and it's going to be a challenge of your system. So who is providing education and training to adults in Australia, in Slovenia? So you've got parts of schools and private secondary schools. We know there's 47 parts of schools, and I'm not sure we know how many private schools there are in total, at least in the information I've got, there's a question mark there. And of course, higher vocational colleges, so the formal, and HE institutions and universities. So 50 higher education institutions, 4 universities, and I think that's about it. No, you've got specialised adult education institutions, and you've got your Root Scout universities as well, so 34 of those. And I think that's about it. No, sorry, you've got parts of enterprises, and then you've got business chambers who have education centres providing training, and there's 7 of those. And I think that's it. No, sorry, you've got NGO providers, you've got 201 of those, and that should be... No, sorry, you've got intercompany training centres, you've got 20 of those, you've got competence centres for human resources development, 11 of those. Have I missed anything? Libraries, delivered study circles, training, driving schools, other, and I think that's it. No, because, at least for non-formal education, this information comes from the survey put out by your statistical office, which sends surveys out to who they identify as potential providers of adult learners, and they think there's as many as 800. But you basically catch 500 of them here. So you've got a large number of and diversity of providers delivering public and private, formal, non-formal training of different sorts to different clients, different users, individual adults and workplaces. So it's a rich, diverse system with lots of actors involved. So is anyone else involved in adult learning? Well, then you've got 212 municipalities, and they own the premises of the Lutsko universities. Many of them actually fund adult learning, so we went through dozens and dozens of budgets and actually found out that the Ministry of Finance collects and centralises information on how much money municipalities are spending on adult education programs. But the people we spoke to didn't know that data exists. So there's some interesting data you might want to take a look at if you haven't seen it. You've got 12 regional development agencies, and actually all of them have committees for human resources. All of them have regional plans, and 11 of the 12 plans include specific priorities and targets related to adult learning and adult education. So they're quite active as well as others. Social partners, well, their main expression of support is through collective agreements, and the latest data, which is quite old now, 2013, shows that 63% of workers are covered by collective agreements in Slovenia, but that's obviously been coming down since 2005. We've got 5 major intersectoral employer associations and 49 trade unions, and of course the researchers, the institutes, the academics, etc., who, like us, are trying to make sense of all of this and trying to give useful recommendations and insights. And of course, you've got the adult learner, the individual who we're all trying to serve, whose needs we're trying to meet through all these diverse services and the efforts of different ministries and agencies, etc. So I'd like to think that they're at the centre of all this. So that's one of the considerations for this system. So if you wanted to map the system, this is probably what it would look like. I don't think we're going to publish this in the report. But this, I'm not sure that this would be unique to Slovenia's adult learning system, but the story I'm trying to tell is that the chances of you getting this right without really effective coordination and cooperation are low. You're not going to get this right by accident, and obviously there's lots of things Slovenia is doing to facilitate coordination and cooperation, and our job has been to try and find ways to make that even better. So no, complexity is not necessarily a problem, it's inherent to adult learning systems. Unpack. 19% participation in adult learning is an ambitious target. That's the target of your Slovenian Development Strategy 2030. You can see that would require an increase from 12%, 7 percentage points in the space of 13 years. In the Eurostat's data, 3 countries have increased participation by that amount in 13 years. So it's an ambitious target, and actually this target, I believe, was already in your current LPIO, your current master plan. So I think you just borrowed the same target and moved it forward. And now the question is, what else needs to change to get there? Participation gaps are large and in some cases quite persistent. So the first 3 here is participation by educational attainment, and here's the gap between tertiary educated and low educated. And this gap has not decreased in the last 10 years. Obviously, like most countries, participation declines with age. And in fact, Slovenia is doing quite well with some of these older cohorts up here, having increased participation over the last decade. So I think by age, there's a bit of a good news story there. By employment status, this one is worrying because employed persons are participating more, which is good. Unemployed are participating less than 10 years ago in formal and non-formal education and training. So that gap has increased. And then, of course, there's a regional story as well, and most of the rises are in the cities, towns and suburbs, less so in rural areas. So that, plus motivating adults to learn, I think you've seen the statistics enough times. 46% of Slovenian adults did not participate and did not want to participate in 2007. And it's roughly the same, it's 48% after 10 years. So really sticky, persistent challenges. And here is a graph of public funding from the 2 ministries that spend the most on adult education and training in Slovenia. Ministry of Labour, Ministry of Education. We don't have any answers about what the right level of funding is, but that is not a steady flow of funding. And we did hear many times from the stakeholders involved in our process that this has undermined the sector's ability to develop and meet national targets for adult learning. So we need to think about new mechanisms for funding adult learning, mechanisms that aren't just reliant on public sources, but also on the social partners and in some cases the individual. So in light of that, what are our recommended actions? So we had 8. We've broken them down in 3 areas. So we have 3 actions to set the overall conditions for effective cooperation. One of those is developing a more comprehensive adult learning master plan, improving cross-sectoral oversight and accountability in adult learning, and 3, getting better information into the system to support the dialogue and support the decisions. So they're the overall conditions, and they will hopefully help cooperation between all the different stakeholders that we mentioned. The second area is strengthening cooperation between specific actors. So they're the 3 levels that I mentioned before. And then the fourth area, strengthening cooperation to address specific challenges. Awareness raising and motivating adults to learn, and then cooperation on funding adult learning. So let's look at the first one. So, a comprehensive adult learning master plan. A lot is already in place. From your highest development strategy 2030, you've got targets to increase adult learning participation. Your new Adult Education Act expands provisions and expands public services in some areas as well. Expands the role of municipalities. You've got a current adult learning master plan, the LPIO. The LPIO is focused on the elements of adult learning that are within scope of that piece of legislation, the ZERO. It does exclude privately funded education and training, the sectoral education and training that we heard about in the health sector and the agricultural sector and whatnot, and higher education. And it does actually go beyond the scope of the ZIO Act and mention different forms and types and levels of education and training, such as short cycle, higher vocational. But really, it can't have much impact on that without the legislative backing. Those other forms of education and training actually have their own legislation. So it seems that there is a level of fragmentation of the legislation underpinning the system. That sort of spread responsibilities across lots of different ministries and sectors. The participants in our project said, at least some of them, that this plan perhaps doesn't have the cross-sectoral buy-in that it needs to really push the sector along where it needs to go. The responsibilities of different ministries, municipalities, trade unions, employer associations, different employers, etc., are not articulated in the plan. It is more focused on what is the government going to do with the government's money. And you still have adult learning priorities, goals and targets spread across several other sectoral strategies in Slovenia, and we mentioned those strategies in the report. So what are some good practices? Well, we had a look at some of your own work, and the 2007 lifelong learning strategy seemed like an attempt to create something truly comprehensive, and perhaps one of the reasons it didn't get up is because it's so difficult to do and it really does require so much change. But also we looked at, we've done a case study on Norway's strategy for skills policy, which really has social partners, different levels of government around the table designing a plan, a strategy together and buying into that plan. So there's the recommendation. We think the details show you how we think the next master plan could be expanded and improved, including clarifying what are the roles and responsibilities of each sector. And the word partnerships comes up a lot when we talk to people in this project. It's one of the reasons why the Adult Education Coordination Body was created. But what exactly is meant by partnerships? Between whom and for what purpose? How would you know when two actors should consider a partnership? What are the criteria? Is it about cost effectiveness? Is it about quality? There seems to be a lack of clarity about what the role of partnerships are in the sector, and I think that could be clarified in a strategic document. When and how and why different sectors should consider joining their money, joining their intellectual capital, joining their resources, etc., and doing it together. And of course, you need to connect this to other strategies, including the development strategy. Cross-sectoral body, so lots of bodies, expert councils, Economic and Social Council, ESS. We did hear from participants that the AE body and SSIO are great forums for sharing information and having dialogue, but they're not driving the partnerships that were envisaged for the system, and they're not having enough impact on policy design. One of the reasons for this is those bodies have no decision-making or spending capacity. They are advisory bodies. Now, a question for Slovenia is, first of all, what level of cooperation and coordination are you looking for and in what forms? And do you think you can achieve that with such disaggregated responsibility and roles and capacity? And would you actually need a central body that can make decisions on some things, that would have control over a share of the adult education body to spend on areas that are highly prospective for partnerships, etc.? Of course, not more bureaucracy, more effective bureaucracy is what we have in this project. And there's some examples within Slovenia and from Latvia, the Adult Education Governance Council, that could inform how you could improve these bodies. So here's the recommendation we made: strengthening oversight and accountability. So we think you could expand and strengthen the AE body and give it some decision-making capacity. Expand the remit of the SSIO. There are 9 ministries involved in adult learning. My understanding is the Expert Council advises one of those ministries. Could it advise all of them? In expanding the responsibilities and remits of the AE body, for example, we think legislation would be required, clarifying its objectives, its role, what is its relationship to other bodies, accountability, capacity, and of course you need to monitor and improve these settings over time as you experience them. Improved cooperation relies on high quality information as well. And so, at least in non-formal education and training, it looks like there is a lack of data that would enable you to understand exactly the types of people who are enrolling in different types of institutions, different types of programs, and follow them as they journey through the adult education system. A lot of the data is summary statistics or survey-based. Evaluation, it seems, is largely voluntary and self-evaluation, which is good up to a point, but what we've suggested is that it's getting increasingly important to try, as hard as it is, to assess the outcomes being achieved by different programs and providers, and make funding decisions based on that information and those other things. You have some good practices in Slovenia. The Employment Service of Slovenia is quite good in evaluating its programs. Of course, it's easier if you're more focused on employment outcomes, but they're doing quite a lot of modelling and statistical work. Good quality stuff. In higher education, the higher education sector in Slovenia is implementing something like a tracer survey that monitors graduates' employment outcomes. So I think there are ideas existing here in Slovenia that could potentially be applied more systematically in adult learning. And we've given some international examples in the report for that as well. So between specific sectors, we asked the question to the ministries involved: do you get on with each other? How well are you coordinating with each other? And the general sense was, we are coordinating, we're involved in different bodies and processes and whatnot. And, do we think it's generating a lot of benefit? Not necessarily. And this goes back to the effectiveness of the formal bodies that exist. But the participants constantly talked about the need for a culture of cooperation in the civil service, and feeling that they lack either the time to engage with others or the skills when there's differing views, different philosophies in different ministries, etc. Not much recognition for doing so. And we did find examples of ministries implementing programs that are targeting similar groups of adults with similar services, and we asked the question, could that have been an opportunity for one of these partnerships that we hear a lot about in your documents, etc. Your public administration ministry is actually doing a lot to improve some of these settings, so we've spelled that out in the report, how you could build on that in the adult learning sector. And we've given examples from Ireland as well. Our recommendation would be to survey those involved and ask them about the skills they have, the resources they have, the recognition they face, etc., for engaging in cooperation, because cooperation is time-consuming and it's complex. It's difficult to do. So, is there enough capacity? Raising awareness, training in skills for cooperation, stronger requirements and recognition. Cooperation with municipalities. So the ministries we spoke to said, yeah, we have no direct lines of communication with municipalities in adult learning. Yet the new Act increases the requirements on municipalities to get involved in adult learning. So how do you hold those two things together? In the formal bodies that exist and in some processes, it seems that municipalities are underrepresented. Often they're not sitting at the table, either via their associations or directly. We think there could be opportunities for municipal annual plans to be better connected to the National Master Plan. And locally, cooperation at the local level, this is one of the strong points in Slovenia that we heard. And the variety of providers and centres that exist do act as hubs for different sectors to get together and find solutions to common problems, and we've got examples of that in the report. So far, municipalities, at least what we saw, have not entered into joint adult learning plans, which is allowed under the new legislation. And the regional bodies, which we said, the regional development agencies, which have specific targets for adult skills and learning, we haven't seen evidence that they're actually facilitating partnerships or cooperation between the different municipalities. So we think their role could be strengthened. And a couple of good examples, Jesenice, international example, Lithuania. Lithuania has actually decided that municipal implementation was the weakness of its system, and it developed a very sort of large project that went in and did a lot of capacity building projects at the local level so that they can more effectively and more efficiently help achieve those national targets. So we think municipalities and regional development agencies need to contribute to all the actions that we spell out in this report, and we think that regional bodies could play a bigger role in facilitating adult learning partnerships. Ministries could use their tenders to reward local partnerships, and we think the Institute for Adult Education could actually make a point of recognising and publicising these good examples happening at the local level. Jesenice being one of them that we picked up on. So government and stakeholders improving the cooperation there. The Economic and Social Council, your foremost body for tripartite policy, debate and negotiations, we went through the history of their meeting agendas over 8 years, and out of 65 summaries, we found adult learning policy discussed once. That could just be that there's been one adult learning policy in the last 4 years, but I don't think that's correct. We think there is scope to raise the profile of adult learning in the Economic and Social Council of Slovenia. We heard a lot in this project with regards to government's relationship with stakeholders. Well, who is asking the end users what they want? It's not just about us designing services that we think is best. And I think we heard some examples this morning of centres working very closely with local communities to understand their needs and their gaps and tailor programs to those needs. So how do you make this good practice systematic? In formal education and training, it sounds like there is limited evidence that formal providers are creating flexible learning for adults, distant, modular, etc. We understand that it's largely a tweaking of the same product that is given to younger students. So we think you need to better monitor and understand how flexible is provision on the formal side specifically. Lots of good practices in Slovenia again, Slovenska Bistrica. So this is the area we're in now, is that right? Or the countries nearby, yeah. Okay, so we've got lots of examples there about how you interact with your local community to design programs and services. So how do you make this systematic? How do you spread good practice? And we think the ACS, Slovenian Institute, could have a role in highlighting that through awards and recognition, etc. So the final two challenges: improve cooperation on raising awareness about adult learning. A lot of what I've said till now is slightly theoretical. It's about how do you improve cooperation. You could arguably apply that to any policy area, but these two issues came up again and again. How do you raise awareness and motivate adults to learn? There is a lot already in place. The Lifelong Learning Week has an international reputation. I've seen case studies about it in the European literature, etc. Guidance counsellors are being expanded under the new Act. But it seems like public institutes and public agencies are driving awareness raising, and more cross-sectoral, widespread support is needed to share support for this, specifically among the unemployed and inactive, low-skilled workers, and smaller enterprises. So we actually found that the Croatians have created a strategic framework for promotion of lifelong learning, and that sets out how they are going to raise awareness over a 5-year period, and what the different responsibilities are for each sector in doing that. And United Kingdom's Union Learn, this sort of umbrella organisation for the unions, is very active going into workplaces and pushing for employers to support and workers to get involved in education and training. This is just a chart, a bit outdated now, 2011, but it shows the sources of information that adults use when they're looking for learning opportunities in Slovenia. And essentially, the internet is the most common, like most European countries. But basically, you can see there that family, employers, career guidance, education and training providers, mass media all have a role in raising awareness about adult learning. And so we think that we should create a cross-sectoral action plan for promoting adult learning, supported by a national multimedia campaign as well. In that plan, delineating responsibility to each sector. So employer associations can focus on small businesses, trade unions can focus on low-skilled workers, the employment service officers focus on raising awareness amongst the unemployed, and the list goes on right down to schools who have a role in identifying parents who could benefit, particularly low-skilled parents who could benefit from training. And the final issue, the money question, improving cooperation on funding adult learning. As you saw, public funding has been unstable over the last decade. Funding is currently highly reliant on the European Social Fund and exposed to potential changes. A lot of the funding seems to be going towards institutions and perhaps not to individuals or into workplaces. As I said, we looked at lots of collective agreements to see how the provisions to support education and training differ in different sectors, and they do differ quite a bit. Some sectors are clearly lagging behind, so there's more role for social partners there. Ultimately, we think there's a need to better share and better target funding. And we looked at Norway's shared funding approach to adult learning, and essentially they created an agreement between the different ministries, the different levels of government, the social partners, on who is going to pay for different types of education and training, whose responsibility is it, a high-level agreement. In France, their employment and skills development actions program is largely involving sectoral funds, but with public money topping up those funds as well. We were surprised to see from the continuous vocational training survey that Slovenian employers are actually doing relatively well in supporting education and training across firm size, different sizes. They are above the European average in terms of the number of employers who provide education and training or the number of workers who are involved. The difference is by sector. So your information and communications, financial and insurance activities sector, support a lot of training. Here you see expenditure on continuing vocational training makes up almost 4% of the total labour costs of enterprises in this sector. Very high for industry, who in Slovenia's case is manufacturing, so spending quite a lot on education and training for employers. Down here is the construction industry. Now, construction industries always spend less, but far less than the European average here. Wholesale, real estate, etc. So some sectors can do more to invest in training. So our last recommendation here is we think the Economic and Social Council should negotiate a high-level funding agreement about who should fund what in the style of the Norwegian agreement. We think funding should be ensured for second chance upper secondary and basic skills programs, not negotiable and shouldn't be changing between European periods and projects and programs, etc. It needs to be stabilised, even if you can't stabilise all funding. Strengthening education and training in those lagging collective agreements and getting them up to best practice collective agreements like the banking and financing sector, where you can basically go study whatever you want at any time with support from your employer, down to some other sectors, electricity, utilities and construction, where there's very minimal provisions for participating in education and training. We think you could pilot sectoral training funds in those sectors that are falling behind in the participation of workers in education and training, and government could co-finance these because you are dealing with low-skilled adults predominantly. And finally, we heard from people at the local level and ministries that dealing with European money is really complex and time-consuming. And there's a lot of good things that are being done with European money through different adult education centres and different ministries. But, we've heard stories of, the Ministry of Education not spending the first dollars until 2 years into the operational period because of the time it took to get all the infrastructure ready for that. And here you have these big gaps in funding and provisions. So we've recommended that the government office who oversees that lead a process of trying to streamline that process and making it easier for the local actors who want to access EU funds and making it easier for the ministries. So we then went a step further and we carved out, so in the report each action is about 2 pages long, sometimes 3. So you've just got the summary version here. So we've carved out the individual components of each action and tried to suggest which ministry could lead different actions or parts of actions, just because we know accountability is important in this context. And we don't want this to just be a piece of an analysis that ends up on a shelf. And of course, it's not just about government. What can municipalities and associations do, regional bodies, social partners, individual business chambers, trade unions, businesses, etc.? So we tried to identify who could be responsible for each of these actions to actually get them implemented in Slovenia. Apart from that, you will have to wait until December for the full report, and I will hand over to Ema.